So,
I have just started recording. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me greet you on behalf of the ICC. Today, we are happy to have two great presenters with us, Dr. Deborah Swallow and Barry Tomalin. So before I give the floor to you, I would just like to ask the participants to mute their microphones and switch on their cameras, please. And if you have any questions or comments, please write in the chat box and we will talk about them a bit later. Okay, so over to you, Barry.
Okay, well, look, thank you for coming on and thank you for joining us. Just to let you know that the program will actually have a recording which is going to go onto our website, so you can go back over it when you want to. And also I'll be writing it up as an article in our forthcoming ICC journal, which will be available during September. So if for any reason you can't get everything you want, there is still plenty of opportunity to pick it up as we go. All right. The agenda for our program today, which is helping and understanding students' engagement, has three parts. One of the kind of problems we're finding with students studying overseas, both online and face-to-face. Number two, the issues of understanding culture shock. And number three, the issues of coming home. I'll look after the first part, studying overseas. And then Debbie will take over and look after understanding culture shock and the problems of when you try and go home. And if you have ideas and if you have thoughts and insights that you'd like to share, please put them into the chat box and then we'll have a Q&A so that we can actually discuss things. And also you can use the raise hand button in order to be able to intervene as well. We are very interested in your experiences as well as ours. Okay, so on that note, let me see if I can move to the first stage, studying overseas. And Debbie has this wonderful image of goldfish jumping out of one jar and into another tank. Basically, our question is why students don't fit in.
Excuse me, Barry, we're not seeing your screen. We're not seeing.
Now, I wonder why not, because I hoped we were. What are we seeing?
I'm seeing our pictures. I'm not seeing.
Can you share the screen again, Barry?
I'm going to share the screen again because I think that's the way to. I had it up on my thing, so we should be all right. Let me try one more time. Here. Oh, I see what happened. It said Firefox error. Let me just re-go. Thank you for pointing this out. And just go up on the screen again. Okay, that is there. Let us then go to share screen. I love this, happens all the time. Have you noticed? It can be so hard. Cannot invoke. Don't do this to me, please.
Well, Barry, I can put the things up and then just change the slides.
Okay, let me have one more go, just in case. There it is. Let me just see if I can make it work this time. Right, can you see it now?
Yes.
Yes, participants can see. Let us play from the start as a slideshow. And there we go. All right, that's looking better. Good. Okay, so let's start. Why don't students fit in? It's an interesting question. The research we've done is at various universities that we've taught at, mainly in London. It's relatively informal, but nevertheless, it's there and it fits in. And it's working, studying abroad as an adventure. For many, it's a defining positive experience in their lives. Many experience difficulties and intense loneliness. And that affects not just the quality of their lives, but also affects their studies. And Debbie and I both teach at the Glasgow Caledonian University in London. And we've also taught at other London universities and outside London as well. So we're very aware of how this does affect students' progress. I've identified in this 7 problems, one way to help. One is distance. 2, believe it or not, is living with families. Number 3, not be able to mix very easily with other people. Number 4 is fascinating. I don't understand my teacher. That's a fairly major issue. Number 5, I stick with my nationality and avoid others. And number 6 and 7, I have burnout intellectually and emotionally. And of course, I'm subject to culture shock, which Debbie will pick up on in a few minutes. Distance. We found in London, which is after all a big city, that a lot of the students were studying in central London, but their accommodation was way outside in the outskirts of London, with say an hour by tube and walking, etc., to get into the university and over an hour to get back. So basically, they found it very difficult to get involved in social events in the university centre, particularly the student union, because they had to go back. So that caused a lot of difficulties for some people. And our experience was the teachers didn't know and never inquired. Why should we? We've got other responsibilities and other things to do. So having distance can be a problem. And it's worth getting to know our students well enough to know what those problems might be, even if we can't help too much because they're not going to move. We may at least be able to show some kind of sympathy to that situation. This was a hard one, living with a family. We all think that living with a family is your ultimate in getting to know the country, getting to know the people and fitting in. But actually we found, and this may be just London, but it's an interesting reflection, that the accommodation department in the university placed the students with a family, and the family were not interested in the students, they were interested in the rent that came from letting out rooms. So they gave the student a room, they prepared an evening meal for them, but there was no social contact at all. So one student said, I sit in my room every evening, and on weekends, I feel very lonely. So actually, the family experience, which we think may be a very positive thing, can actually turn out to be very negative. And it's worth keeping an eye open for the students who seem distracted and seem not to really be able to participate, because it may be something to do with their current background situation. Third one, because of the above, I don't and I can't attend social events in college. I don't go to the students' union. I don't belong to any clubs or associations, which is vital, I think, if you're a student. And as a result, they feel very excluded. So basically, we've got various social factors, which are not part of the study program, which we're offering, but which is causing a degree of non-involvement, loneliness, and distraction for the students, which have nothing to do with us. But nevertheless, if we know about it, maybe we can help. This one has a lot to do with us. And here I'd like to pay tribute to the former coordinator of ICC languages, Özlem Yüges, who left in February from ICC, but is doing her PhD studies in just this subject. The issue is, I don't understand my teacher. Why not? And I've seen this. Although I speak and read the language to the required college requirements, i.e. level 6 or whatever it happens to be of TOEFL or IATEFL, I still have difficulties understanding my teacher or my lecturer. One, we talk too fast. Okay. Number 2, they speak with regional accents, which I never learned. Nothing you can do about that. But nevertheless, obviously slowing down helps. Oh, this is common, especially unfortunately for the British. Some of them use humor, which I don't understand. British are very good at telling bad jokes. You heard a couple this morning. It is a problem. And they never seem to pause to allow us to take in the information. They just carry on with the next slide, the next piece of information. This is very common, as you all know, as teachers. They use a lot of idioms, native speakers, and they never explain them. And they use acronyms quite often, and they don't explain them. So you've probably all seen this. Have you seen students on their iPhones in the classroom? And what you want to say is, look, for God's sake, put your iPhone away and concentrate. And then you realize the reason they're on the iPhone is they haven't understood something you've said and they're looking it up. So that can cause a problem. So these are fairly small things, but nevertheless, they're all having an effect on how we see things. So when I'm working with teachers in teacher training programs and cultural training programs, I make this point, and also, by the way, to managers, about the use of English. I learned French and I speak French reasonably fluently. I've lived in French-speaking countries, but at one time I took my French idea of an accent from the actor Jean-Paul Belmondo, who always used to speak with a cigarette in his mouth. In those days, smoking was still fashion. Gitane, I think. And ultimately, quand tu parles français, c'est très facile, c'est complètement facile, je parlais parfaitement. Nobody understood a single word that I said. And eventually, French colleagues said to me, Barry, for God's sake, please slow down. And that's how I developed the concept here of articuler, articulate. If you can actually speak much more clearly, you get a much better result. Deb is great at this, Francis is great at this, and I'm sure the rest of you are as well. I've had to learn it. The second piece of information I learned from working in the BBC. Leave a beat when you speak before important information. If you listen to all the commentaries on television and on radio, you'll notice the reporters actually leave a tiny millisecond beat before the final important information. And if they do that, actually you get the information much more clearly because your brain has time to attune. And the exercise I use with my classes is very simple. Get them to say their names, go around the room. My name is, and if they say, my name is Francis Brassard, who the hell is that? But my name is Francis Brassard. Good, got it. That little pause helps us connect and get the information. That's Francis, who's on the screen there in front of you. Okay, avoid jokes. Avoid colloquialisms. I mean, we're back to square one. Nobody understands back to square one if they're in a foreign language, because it's difficult, because they may have the same acronym, or the same idiom, but they may not have it in the same language or using the same image. So you need to do that. And then the last one's very valuable, KISS. Keep it short and simple, acronym. One thought per sentence, if you can. And make your sentences limited to between 12 and 25 words. If you can do that, you actually have a chance of being much clearer, especially on WhatsApp and in emails. So these are the kind of things I would teach people, teachers, to try and help them be much clearer. So number 5, what's the problem they have? I noticed this with Chinese students when we had a lot of Chinese students in London. We don't so much anymore because of the difficulties with COVID, etc. But I noticed that we would have 32 Chinese in a class and they would not mix. They'd spend their time with other Chinese. So they were always with people from their own nationality, their own region. They sat together in lectures and seminars. They revised together, and as a result, they always produced the same answers. And I referred some of the essays to Turnitin, which is our plagiarism assessment device. And university authorities said, no, they're just revising together and they tend to use the same phrase. And one of the famous ones I had was, Singapore is a very fine place. You get a fine for everything. Anyway, leave that with you. So they don't mix much with other nationalities, and they certainly don't mix with the home students. So all these create a sense of isolation for the student, which affects their ability to work. They have a very heavy workload. They're working every hour of every day. When they're not at meetings, lectures or seminars, they're on their computer and they get burned out. So before we finish this section, the last thing we're going to say is culture shock. I feel I don't fit in, and Debbie's going to deal with that in detail in just a minute. But one two exercises I do with classes, which I think are very valuable. One of them is a concept of looking at where you don't feel good about things and really use a process where you map what are the problems, okay, what are they doing, what am I doing? So you compare. Number two, you bridge it. You examine why they're doing what they're doing and what they think of you. And then integrate, what can I change and what have I learned? So how do I adapt and reflect? And if you can do that regularly with your students in class, get them to tell you the incidents that they have found difficult to deal with and get them to use that, that can really help a lot. So how can we help? Last slide of my bit for the moment. Slow down. Make sure the important points are clear. Cultural sensitivity. Get to know your class a bit so you can identify personal difficulties. If necessary, this is important, get the support of student care body, even pastoral care. I've had Muslim students who welcome the intervention of a Christian Protestant pastor because they have the time and the energy to be able to help them with any social difficulties they experience. So it can be regardless of religious denomination. Keep in touch with a student representative because they might be able to tell you where the problems are and you can approach how to deal with them. But above all, show interest if you can and try and mediate at least a part of your curriculum to the students' personal interest and experience, because that can really help you. But Özlem did come up with one worrying situation where a teacher asked the class to write about their journey to the university that morning, and one student didn't do it. So she got a bit angry and said, "Why aren't you doing it? Tell us about your journey." And the student started telling it and broke down into tears because it had been such a terrible journey for her. So you have to be careful. So those are the points that I'd like to make. And just very quickly in the chat, Xiaoming did her PhD study on this exact topic too, and the findings were pretty much similar. So when we get to Q&A, Xiaoming, perhaps we can ask you to make a comment on that. Thank you very much for that. So now, if I may, I'm going to turn the screen over to Debbie, who will pick up on the crisis point. Over to you.
Thank you. So let me share my screen. So can somebody give me the hosting rights, please?
Yes, I think now you should be able to share it.
Yes, okay. Yeah.
Good.
Right. Okay, can you now see my screen?
Yes, you're on to
Yes.
the first slide.
Right, okay, thank you.
Well done.
Right. Okay, so we were talking to our students, and we asked them about how they had been feeling. And it was one day they woke up and, you know, with all the things in the world to be thankful for and blessed with, but they felt depressed. They didn't know why. And yes, they were missing friends and family. But after a while, things were getting so bad that they were beginning to question, why am I here? And should I be going home? And I remember when I was at university and I went to do my year in France, I was with a group of students from my own university, and they were all happy to be in dormitories together. I chose to go and stay with a family because I wanted to improve my French and learn about the culture. But you know, a couple of the girls ended up going home within 3-4 weeks of us being there. And it was, now I know, it was culture shock. They just couldn't get on. Lots of students, lots of people, and in fact, school children, often going from primary school to secondary school, have a feeling which is disorientation, and is in fact a form of culture shock. So we ought to be cognizant of the fact that culture shock isn't just about going and living abroad. It's when you find yourself in a completely different context and you're there either for good or for some time, and you question what's going on. Well, Barbara Marx came up with what she called the W curve. So culture shock is has a process, and it's rather like the grief process. We can describe stages, and I will go through these stages in a little bit. But Barbara Marx was saying, you get to the honeymoon stage when everything's great, and then you fall into culture shock, and then you do a series of experiencing mini culture shocks. So it's almost as it's a recurring thing. You get over your culture shock, or you think you are, and then you fall into it again, and then you fall into it again. But eventually you have adaptation until you get to a stage of integration. So culture shock, when does it start? Interestingly, it generally doesn't start right at the beginning, because we have this honeymoon stage when everything is good. How does it start? Well, it just gradually seeps in. It's almost as though it seeps out of the woodwork at you, and you begin to feel that everything's getting at you. But it's a slow process. Obviously, with some people, it can happen quicker than with others. And I would say that nearly everyone suffers culture shock to some degree or another. So some people have it worse than others. Interestingly, the Japanese call it, or had a name for it, called the Paris syndrome. And this was coined at the late 80s, early 90s, when lots of partners of Japanese ambassadors who had gone to France came home early. They just couldn't live the French way of life, and they really did call it the Paris syndrome. My interpretation of that is that the Japanese had such a romantic idea of what Paris would be like because of all the Hollywood movies from years ago, that when they got to Paris, they were finding the waiters rude, the taxi drivers rude, compared with the harmonious way that Japanese society works. It was, and that was the biggest culture shock. So you didn't get London syndrome or New York syndrome. It was called Paris syndrome, and what we now know was it was culture shock. So what are the symptoms? Loneliness, anxiety, definitely underperformance for obviously the ambassadors, or for our students. They're not working to full capacity. They have depression, or it can be the reverse, that they put so much work and concentration, they overwork and get burnout. And we know, because of Barbara Marx's research, that you do get mini shocks and you can keep falling back into culture shock. So what's the answer? the answer is to recognize it's not you. And it is this thing called culture shock, which does affect you mentally, and it can affect you quite physically as well. If that's the case, treat it like the flu and go to bed for a couple of days and just wallow in being, and allow yourself to be miserable and just want to curl up with a hot water bottle or something like that. So it's a bit like COVID and the flu, you know, you can't fight it. So just allow yourself to indulge with giving yourself comfort. So a chap called Bennett introduced us to a journey, a cycle that you go through for intercultural sensitivity. If you'll excuse me, Barry, would you mind saying a few words? Because I've just lost the video that I was about to play. So would you mind just talking a bit over this while I find the video again?
Yes, Milton Bennett's from Portland in Oregon. He was the chair of the Oregon Center for Cultural Investigation and Exploration. And they have got an operation that they've also opened in Milan. I think he got stuck there during the pandemic. Not a bad place to get stuck, I have to say. And anyway, he has developed a very, very considerable approach. And his most famous, if you like, model, which is the one that he's used to deal with culture shock, is called the DMIS model, the Developmental Model of Intercultural Sensitivity. And I don't know if this is going too fast, but Debbie has actually developed a video to show you this in action. And I'm not quite sure if you're there or if you're not there.
Oh God, where's it gone? I had it open.
All you do is click on it, and then when you share, you look at your share screen again, it should be there.
Yes, Barry, no, it's disappeared off my screen completely. That's what I meant.
And if we click on YouTube, that doesn't do it, does it? No, it doesn't. Well,
oh, hold on. Aren't I silly?
I don't know. This is way beyond my area of expertise. Okay, well, just as an encouragement to start to hurry you up, I could start talking about Boris Johnson.
Intercultural competence isn't a destination. Thank you.
Yeah.
I do have it.
Where you go. Over to you.
Okay. So you're sharing your screen. Can you by any chance see that YouTube?
Are you talking to me?
Yes, we can see it. We can see it.
We can see it.
Right, great. And I just have to make sure that you're sharing your screen. And I'm just going to stop sharing and then share my screen again so that
it's full screen.
Optimized for video clip. I beg your pardon, everyone.
There it is.
Destination. It isn't something. Intercultural competence isn't a destination. It isn't something you suddenly achieve. It's a journey. It's a journey of 6 stages, and we know that because people make sense of cultural differences in predictable ways as they learn to become more competent interculturally. Because we journey from a point where we believe our own culture is central to reality, to a point where our own culture is seen within an expanded notion of worldviews, I compare it to growing up. At the age of 2, you think your world revolves around you. In fact, you give your mum and your parents a real runaround. By the time you're married and your children are teenagers, you see life from a very, very different perspective. So let's begin our journey. Stage 1 is denial. This is when individuals experience their own culture as the only real one, either because they're young, because of their own isolation, because differences aren't noticed, or because of willful ignorance. Stage 2, defense. This is when we know about others, but our way is the most evolved or best way to live. It's a us versus them mentality in which existing assumptions are reinforced, and any comment directed against our own culture is perceived as an attack. Negative stereotyping can take place within this stage 2. Stage 3 is minimization. This is when we have come to realize that our similarities outweigh our differences. Individuals tell themselves that people are the same everywhere. It's a superficially benign attitude. In other words, people who adopt this point of view generally approach intercultural situations with the assurance that a simple awareness of the fundamental patterns of human interaction is sufficient for successful communication. Many, even most people, live their lives with this approach. However, it supposes that fundamental categories of behavior are absolute and like our own. Stage 4, acceptance. This is when we genuinely acknowledge cultural difference and see that that difference is within its own cultural context. Although we do not necessarily like or agree with it, we can accept it's there. However, we are curious and we ask questions so that we can be informed rather than prejudge, or rather than rely on prejudices. In stage 5, that's adaptation, this is when individuals change their own attitudes, behaviours, and even change their language to match their surroundings in an attempt to communicate and empathise. It's the ability to act properly outside of our own culture. And then we come to the final stage, stage 6, integration. This is when individuals move freely between cultures. They have a definition of self that is marginal, not central. And it's not central to any particular culture. It's quite fluid, it's flowing, allowing this individual to shift smoothly from one cultural worldview to another. Thank you for that, Barry. So Milton Bennett's idea is that you go from absolutely not understanding that there's other people out there, rather like, as I said, a toddler, until you get right through to stage 6, when you just learn to be very adaptable, very flexible, integrated, but you have a sense of who you are. And I think that pretty much goes with the psychology when you look at older people in life, because they tend to be happier with themselves, more accepting, and sometimes less judgmental. I'll put that in brackets, because sometimes I think the older you get, you can sometimes get more judgmental. So how do you cope? So learn about it, and that's what you're doing now. Expect that it's going to happen in some form or other. So I think one of the greatest things we can do to help our students is to inform them about culture shock and tell them that they're likely to suffer from it to a greater or lesser extent. Don't get too busy too quickly, and leave time to settle in and for family and keeping in touch. Keep in contact with family, friends, and the university people at home, or HR if you're working. And note to family, you should, and teachers as well, monitor reactions for signs of depression, because students will need help if they do start suffering from depression. It's not something that you can easily pull yourself out of if you sink below the that borderline of, yeah, I can cope, I'm not coping, I can cope, but when it really sinks, people are going to need help. So coping strategies, take comfort things, not just photos, films and music, but stuff that you can touch and feel, you know, your favorite woolly pulley jumper, a cuddly toy, a favorite mug, a duvet. Find comfort places. I know for me, I quite often go up to the north of England to teenage sit while my son's away working, and I'm not happy when I'm in his flat, but there are 2 parks nearby which have particular corners where I'll go and take myself a thermos flask of coffee and a book, and I'll go and sit in this quiet corner with big leafy green bushes around me, and that makes me feel better. It lifts my mood. So really you need to find comfort places, parks, a religious place of worship, somewhere where they play the music you like, and do comfort activities and try and pursue your hobbies that you would have at home. Don't let your exercise or sports routine slip, because it tends to be part of who you are and your identity. So keep that going, because otherwise you will feel sluggish. Make sure you've got webcam, WhatsApp, Zoom, or whatever to keep you face to face with your friends and your family. Do virtual coffee or tea breaks, or have a dinner date with for students, you know, with their boyfriend on a Friday or a Saturday night. And it's always good to create a blog or a journal about the journal and how you've been feeling. And that is good for when students get back to university, because they can share ideas. But also I think it's good for university support staff to get people to create a journal for a whole class, so that they can compare their experiences. And finally, for culture shock, keep a sense of humor. It'll pass. And remember, it's worse going home. Yeah, coming home, truly. Most assignees believe that returning home is more traumatic than moving abroad. Why? Because so much has changed. And really, is it so much has changed at home? Well, it is if you've been away a long, long time. But a lot of it is that you've changed inside. You are not the same person as embarked on the adventure in the first place. So how do you handle that? Well, when it's time to come home, you must create a leave taking and departure, which would be your stage 1. Your stage 2 of your honeymoon stage, which is going home and everything's wonderful. Stage 3 is you get reverse culture shock, and stage 4 is readjustment. So let's just have a quick look at these stages. So stage 1, leave taking and departure. In order to seek closure, you should create yourself or get organized your farewell parties. Prepare family and friends at home. You know, tell them that you're coming home, you're looking forward to seeing them. Get someone to organize a welcome home party with all your best friends. Check out if there's any new responsibilities that you will be needing to do at home, or the students will need to do at home. And what does the new term look like at university? Are there new rules and regulations? Has the canteen been moved? Has the whole campus been moved? And also, people will quite often be living in a completely different place when they return to university from the place where they were before. Ensure as a student that you prepare for university and contact student to support to ask what support is available. The honeymoon stage is when you go, oh, it's so nice to be home, you know, and at first it feels a bit like being on holiday, but then you notice the changes. So sometimes you can feel very, very excluded. It's almost as though your friends have bound together, and you know, yes, they're welcoming you back in, but they seem to have shared jokes and new ways of doing things that you've never been a party to as these things have evolved. But don't judge, and just be aware that you have matured. I know coming back and living in Southend where I live now, after being a few years away at university and then working for Ford in Spain as an interpreter, when I came back at the age of 24, I felt as though my wings had been clipped and that I was in a cage. I found it really difficult at first, but you know, I just took a deep breath and just got on with it. But now I understand what was happening. And I'd grown up a lot, and lots of my friends hadn't. So the reverse culture shock thing is a bit where you feel taken for granted. Nobody's helping you to move back home, because why should they? It's your home. You know how to live and react and in this culture. Nobody's got any real interest in your experience. They'll ask you a few questions and that's it. You know, over your first cup of coffee together or your first beer, that's it, and then it's gone. You feel marginalized, and in some ways you feel like a minority person in your own country. Then we have the readjustment stage where you achieve balance. There's a lot of acceptance going on. You re-establish your routines, and that's always a good coping strategy. Get into a routine, especially the exercise or some hobbies, and push through that. You have less anxiety and doubt, and you begin to look back on all your previous experiences as learning lessons. So how to minimize reverse culture shock? Think ahead about what you're going to do when you get home. Will there be things you've learned overseas that you will want to use at home, and how? I was always thinking of, you know, what was so good and how can I adapt my ways of working so I can incorporate this into my way of life. One of the things for me has been that in Britain, we don't have any national holidays apart from Christmas Day and the next day, where everybody else seems to have a national day, an Independence Day, or whatever, a Saint's Day. We don't in the UK. But when I used to go to the Scandinavian countries a lot, they always celebrated Midsummer. And I've made it a tradition in my family that the weekend nearest Midsummer, we would do something just to make it special. So those are the sorts of things that you can do to help minimize reverse culture shock. Look for ways to validate the overseas experience, and especially meeting people from that country. If you were speaking the foreign language, it helps you to keep your language skills up. Telling jokes in a foreign language, keep up to date with their politics and their international relations. So there's lots of things that you can do. And if you feel depressed or need support, talk to friends you can trust and arrange with school or college for mentoring or counselling. Before you go home, find out how things have changed at home. Don't get upset when you experience them. As I said, a coming home party to catch up with everybody. Keep in touch with overseas friends via social media. Identify a university tutor or a personal mentor that you can rely on and speak to. Talk to others who've studied abroad, because they'll be suffering the same way, and swap experiences with them and ask them, how did they adapt? So don't jump to any conclusions. Don't be judgmental. Just try and engage with the experiences that you have had and turn them into lessons learned and how you can apply them. Because as sure as, and here's an English idiom for you, as sure as eggs are eggs, whatever you've learned, whatever you experience has been a life skill that you've learned. And I'll pass over to Barry now. Barry, you're on mute.
Your microphone, Barry.
My God, I went on mute so I wouldn't interrupt everybody. And then, of course, okay, well, I'm on Culture Shock every day, Debbie. Thank you very much. Every time I turn on the television, Culture Shock strikes. Anyway, we'll see how we go as things develop. I'm going to cut the last couple of slides because it's not useful to us. But when you go online, you'll be able to see that we have a bibliography there for reference, and also one other area which might be useful to have a quick look at for yourselves.
Barry, can you please share the screen again, because you're the host now.
I'm the host, so I'm going to share the screen. Okay, let's move it forward. Okay, so basically, let's see where we are. Top tips. Can everybody see that okay? No problem?
No, we can't, not at the moment.
Still can't see it yet. Okay, my goodness. It's working for me, so it should work for you guys. Let me try one more time. Oh, computers, why do they do this to us? There it is.
Yes.
Good, excellent, well done. Okay, so I will summarize it very fast, 3 minutes. You may have heard, I know Karen and Xiaoming have done this one, Francis might have done it as well, the INCA framework. INCA stands for Intercultural Assessment Framework, and it's something developed by the European Union by a professor from England, he's now retired, Michael Byram, and it was all about what are the 6 qualities of multiculturality. This can actually be very useful when you're working with students, or if you're in teacher training, working with other teachers. And what he identified was 6 areas which are useful to know. Number 1, avoid othering, be inclusive. Don't reject people. Very easy to reject people. You don't like the way they look, you don't like the way they sound, they don't seem interested in you, all this sort of thing. Number 2, very important, exercise patience. Be tolerant of ambiguity. If you don't know what's going on, stop, look, listen, feel. Number 3, be flexible. Recognize the local solution, the solution of your students based on their own lives and practice may actually be better for the situation than your own. Number 4, show empathy, obviously, put yourself in the other person's shoes, and that is a key area of intercultural sensitivity, which I think we all need to be constantly aware of. This is the one Debbie has made very clear, and I hope I've made clear. Show interest in your colleagues or your clients, if you're training business, culture, and if you can, incorporate their interests into the curriculum, the exercises, the projects which you do. Because if you can do that, then they will become much more engaged. And that can be really valuable. So you've got a student who's crazy about photography, use it. That's the kind of thing that can really help. And last of all, I know we're teaching a foreign language, but nevertheless, if you can learn a few words, it helps. And the joke I use, and I know Francis knows this one because I've probably bored him with it many times, is what's the most popular phrase you need to know in a foreign language for business? And the answer is, can I have a receipt, please? Because you always have to justify your expenses. Anyway, there you go. So that's it from us. Basically, I'll turn it over now, and I'd love to have any insights or comments you want. This will be on the web, so the references will be there. And I've sent you in the chat the reference for Milton Bennett's book. But I think that's the presentation. And we have, what, 7 or 8 minutes left. So quickly, let's use those minutes for anything you would like to add. I know Xiaoming did her PhD on just this subject. Xiaoming, I don't know if you have any particular insights you want to like to add.
I found very similar results. One thing I would add is, apart from the skills and techniques and you think we could improve, it's about the psychology pressure that international students facing, especially when they speak to home student or local. So they feel they have more pressure to making mistakes and etc. So in terms of the cultural training, or to themselves or to the teachers, it's very important for them to build confidence, to be aware of actually English does not belong to English people, just the people who speak of it. So that will enhance a lot of confidence and intercultural sensitivity, especially when they have the communication with the home students. And the other thing is the communication itself is mutual. It's not enough just making effort from the international student side. It's also important for the home student and the home staffs to making some more extra effort to enhance their the cultural sensitivity as well. So because in terms of communication problems, the most problem actually is not international students with international students, it's international students with home students. They are more confrontations, and then they feel more excluded from the home student. So that's so that's another topic.
That's lovely. It's a cat. Good boy.
Yes,
Coming through this tail wandering across the screen. Beautiful. Thank you, Xiaoming. That's really very helpful. Francis, oh yes, go ahead.
Question there. Did you mean that it was when the international students went back home, they had trouble integrating with just the home students, or?
No, I mean the British students, like home.
International students have trouble integrating or mixing with the British
locals students. Yes, with the local students. Yes, sorry, because I did study in the UK, that's why I call. So
and was there a particular reason they found, or what reasons did they give for not being able to meet with the host students very well?
One thing they find is difficult to have the topic to discuss with them. And the topic is really limited, like how are you, what do you study, etc. They find it's difficult to running the topic because they share less of the cultural background together. And secondly, they get afraid of the language itself. For example, the accent, the speed of the native speakers. That's why.
Okay. Does your cat suffer from culture shock? No, good. Excellent. Francis, you and I have taught Germans, various other nationalities coming to Dubrovnik to pursue their studies. How do you react to what you've been hearing this afternoon?
Well, maybe as a way to summarize a little bit what you said, actually, I'm a professor of religious studies, so I study religion. And you may be surprised that yoga and Zen and spiritual practices are actually control-induced culture shock. So in other words, if you practice meditation, you are taught to live through a culture shock and a depression. And the way they do it, it's under control. So it's like in the Zen monastery and the yoga environment. And the way they do it is two things, and that will make connection with what you said. The first one is you deconstruct meaning. What is meaningful is no longer meaningful. So this is the Buddha, if you listen. So I guess one of the main source of cultural shock in the end is that you are deprived of meaningful experience because to some extent, if you go into a foreign, if you are in your own country, the fact that you understand what is all around you, you are kind of extending yourself into that world. If you go to a world where everything is in a different language, you kind of cut up from that, and this is where you feel yourself being a bubble in a way, disconnected. So the first thing then to create meaning, as you say, learning a language, even if you learn a few words, going to places without any purpose, that also helps. Knowing, for example, when I was in London, I will never take the tube. I will take a bus route, and I will see all the stores and the places I could go and visit if I had time and so forth. The second thing they do is to deconstruct or break up habits. Yes. So if you, another source of depression in culture shock is things are not working the way you are supposed to, even going to a bancomat or talking to people, ordering something. And that is, in the long run, is frustrating. Being aware of that and knowing what is to be learned as the new habits, or as many of you said, created some kind of your own habit that are in line with the environment where you find yourself. So that would be the way to do it. So as a summary, really, meaning where we are more passive and habits where we are more active are the two ways to create culture shock in a religious environment. So it means the other way around is to focus on creating meaningful experience and new habits. That's what I had to say.
I think that's a wonderful way of holding the two principles together. Francis, thank you very, very much. That is the subject of your next article.
Yeah, why not?
That is truly is.
Really useful one. I will guarantee to publish. Really, really interesting. Thank you. Okay, we're just on 1700. Has anybody got anything? Just one more thing in the chat. Oh, that's a shame that Michael has had to leave us, but says thank you. Anybody want to make a final concluding comment before we hand it to Tanya to close? Karen, you've been around the world a bit. Do you want to make a concluding comment, or?
No,
partly in South Africa, you've been really had culture shock as part of your life.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it doesn't get easier. That's the extraordinary thing about it. It's hard every time you move. It's not like you get used to it and find some magic trick for it. Yeah, it's always there. Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that I think what Xiaoming was talking about, the difficulties for foreign students of just all of that anxiety that goes around their interactions with local people, is also links back to what you were saying, Barry, earlier about the problem of poor integration. And this, because I work in a university, I see that all the time, and I think that's such a fundamental problem that we have, and I often think of what Helen Spencer-Oty says. We're not internationalized if we don't have integration, and so we think we have an internationalized university. Well, universities all over the UK, but actually, if you're not having that integration and students are just staying in their little pockets and not doing the integration, then all you have is a diverse student body. You don't have an internationalized campus. I think that's really the biggest challenge for me, I think, to achieve that, to overcome the obstacles to integration.
That's a really interesting one. And it's something it's something we really need to address. And I think you've made the point very, very well. I'm conscious that we're now 17:03, so we're 3 minutes over our time scale. So back to you. Thank you, everybody. And Tanya, back to you to say bye-bye.
Okay, thank you so much, Deborah and Barry, for this really interesting presentation. We can take away a lot of practical tips And I would just like to ask you, Barry, maybe to have another webinar with a similar topic when the people are back from holidays, if possible.
Well, we can certainly arrange that. That's not a problem. Also worth mentioning that we are now on holiday, so there will be no webinar in August. But in September, on September the 22nd, Jeff Tranter, who's at Dortmund University in Germany, will be presenting something quite extraordinarily valuable, which is the relationship between twin towns, in his case, Dortmund and Leeds, and how that can lead to cultural integration and language improvement. Absolutely fascinating subject. I've never seen anybody discuss it before. It's going to be really, really interesting. So if you have some time at 5 o'clock CET on the 22nd of September, that's what you're doing. And thank you all for coming. It's lovely to see our friends again, and have a wonderful summer.
Thank you. Enjoy your summer, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.